Well, good afternoon to anybody who may be listening today. Um, and thank you for those who've listened to previous uh, thoughts that I've shared and have even commented in some cases and perhaps liked them. Why do they always say smash the like button, smash it? I don't understand it. I mean, there are two buttons. Their meaning is quite clear. You can press either of them or none of them. Personally, I generally press the like button when I hear something, unless there's something particularly odious to me. Even if I don't agree with everything, I'll generally press the like button. Or don't agree with hardly anything, I'll quite often press the like button, just to show willing. Why not? It's a friendlier way of living, isn't it? But it doesn't really communicate anything. Like reviews, which are generally very good, don't really, if you don't feel confident airing your differences, it's not as welcome, of course, is it? I had a different breakfast this morning. I had bacon butties with poached eggs, and it wasn't really very good. I didn't think. I didn't want the bread particularly, but I thought I'd have a slice. And there wasn't enough butter, and the egg was overcooked. Obviously, it had been cooked, probably a week beforehand. And I know the bar lady there. She's very nice, and she asked me what I'd thought of it, and I said, well, given the price, I don't want to criticise it, but I could. So I criticised it without saying what the problem was. Not particularly helpful to anybody. But they're very economical, those breakfasts. I mean, I'm serious about that. It was good value for money. I mean, if I were eating, if it had cost £10, I might have had a word, but I think it cost about less than £4, probably three. £4 with a cup of coffee. What am I going to complain about? It's ridiculous. But to get into the matter, I've got a bit of a rabbit trail that I've been following, or musing on more than following, and I wanted to share it in case anybody else would like to jump in or offer their thoughts or just follow it. It's interesting. Back in 2020, I came across John O'Looney, who is a funeral director working in Milton Keynes, which is what's called a new town, and it's about between Birmingham, where I live, and the capital city, London. And he's been speaking quite openly about the effects of the pandemic and the treatment that was offered to provide protection against infection from the point of view of his profession and the number of people that he'd been, I don't know what they call it, the number of deceased that had passed through his offices. It's a very interesting subject. And he was removed quite rapidly from social media, and he fell into somewhat obscurity. I mean, I listened to a few of his things, then I became suspicious because everything seemed to be so controlled in 2020 and 2021 as well. And then I thought, well, his name is O'Looney, of course, and that means a lunatic also. Maybe they're just using him to poke fun at everybody. And I thought, not much more of it. I just didn't know. I hadn't got enough information to form a solid opinion. But for some reason, he's been allowed back on Facebook in a very long interview with Liam Tuff. And I would recommend, it was only published a month ago, and um, it's had a fair number of views, but I think less than 200,000. And really, it's something that everybody should watch, I think, because the level of information and disclosure is absolutely astonishing. And I've become pretty firmly convinced that this gentleman is genuine in his speaking. Certainly on that matter, he may have been led into other trails, of course, because when somebody speaks the truth, one of the most subtle ways that you can discredit them is to associate them with something that is not the truth. And I'm afraid this may have happened to him, with later theorizing about the effect and the purpose of the 5G network. I'm sure people know about those ideas. They may be true, I don't know, but I don't think they're sufficiently substantiated. It's a different territory. It's not his specialization. His power comes from the fact that he deals with the deceased, and he employs what is called a professional embalmer, who's somebody who comes in and embalms very quickly after death. He stresses the importance of this for the maximum effect, unlike the common practice of trade embalmers who will embalm perhaps 5 corpses or 4 or 5 corpses and get £100 for each one, so they'll wait until they build up, achieving very suboptimal effects in terms of preservation. If preservation of a corpse is something desirable, I'm not sure about it. It's a modern practice, I suppose, if you have an open coffin. If you have a chapel of rest in Italy, it was quite common to see the deceased laid out. I went to see my father, and he had obviously been embalmed, and they would have embalmed him when I informed them that I was going to see him, and added the cost perhaps to their bill, I don't know. But you need to embalm people quickly. And he was in a privileged position to see the events that were going on, and he got involved in them to some extent because of his disclosures. He was invited to a meeting in London with some very senior officials, or rather with one particular senior government official, and a lot of high-ranking doctors and researchers and so on and so forth from academia, I suppose, and from the healthcare sector. These were all top people. I think maybe they would have been more sympathetic to his cause to attend such a meeting, whereas the commitment of the government to attend it was probably less heartfelt, given the delicacy of the subject matter. And the only person who attended from the government was Sir Graham Brady, who at the time was the, I forget whether they call it, I think he's the chairman of the 1922 committee, which is a committee that was formed in 1923, and it was composed of the members of Parliament for the Conservative Party in 1922, I think, or the backbenchers of the Conservative Party. And its role has been since 1940, apparently, to select the Prime Minister and also to cast a vote of no confidence. So it's a very influential committee indeed, and obviously it's had its hand in the election of all our prime ministers since its formation, or since 1940 anyway. And when it was his turn to speak on the matters that had been disclosed by John O'Looney and discussed by many of the medical professionals who were concerned and were bringing scientific truths and telling the committee, if you give people this and do this, then the result will be this. And so it's unsurprising that we are seeing this, and so on and so forth. Revelations, really. And Graham O'Brady, I'm sure he said more than this, but the one thing that he did say, I think, which was very telling, was that this matter was above his pay grade, and that there was nothing really that he could do to change it or to stop it or to have any influence. Which is kind of interesting, because his pay grade was really very, very high, as is evident. I'm not just supposing it. That this matter was above his pay grade. And the implication, of course, is that this was, and perhaps still is, a cull, which would be a very treacherous thing to be practiced upon the United Kingdom if it turned out to be true. And the people who are responsible for it would need to be brought to account. And John O'Looney was insistent that he wouldn't rest until they were all tried at Nuremberg. He spoke of a coup d'etat that has occurred in the leadership of this country. That was his conclusion. I don't know, how much that can be relied upon. Certainly Nuremberg will not produce an answer, because anybody who's looked into the Nuremberg trial after the Second World War, or they called the trials, I don't know, I'm sure it's got an official title, you see this is just more theatre that has occurred. Unfortunately, this condemnation of these wicked German high commanders or officers, followed by hangings, I think, and very scandalous and unfortunate matters being revealed of their tremendous disdain for human life. But those revelations have been shown to be deceptive, although that information isn't easily available. You can listen to David Irving. I think he's a reliable reporter, although he's not allowed on YouTube or anything like that, because he's classified as an anti-Semite, or a Holocaust denier is another thing, that you're not allowed, to make those claims publicly. So I'm very careful not to do that, but that could be because I'm just timid. It's certainly one of the reasons, if not the main reason. But fortunately for us, John O'Looney isn't timid, and he speaks very plainly. And he speaks of an attempt that was made on his life, as one could imagine, simply by attempting to bring him into hospital and treat him. So when I, hear all those things and read all those things, and then the thing that particularly troubles me is that Graham O'Brady, or Sir Graham O'Brady, I should properly say, was later elected to the Privy Council of King Charles, which I think is some kind of an advisory group, well salaried. So a kind of golden handshake almost, and honour was bestowed upon him. Now, maybe honour is due to him. I don't know. I'm not claiming that this man is a party to, well, perhaps by silence it would seem that he might be a party, but, I don't know the full story. And this is the problem, I think, sometimes. We have to have due process. We can't just assume, as Mark Devlin did, that anybody, for example, who's involved in the rock music industry or who is a household name in popular music is part of a sect of evil worshippers. That doesn't work. There has to be due process, because the Lord has his people everywhere, and I'm sure within institutions also. So it's a personal matter, and it needs to be proven, and if necessary, of course, in a court of law, if sufficient evidence were to emerge of wrongdoing. This is a very important matter in my mind. But I was thinking about the famous Pink Floyd lyric, and I'm reminded of this because Mark Devlin spoke of Roger Waters from Pink Floyd and the statement that he'd made during the medical emergency of 2020 and 2021, urging people to take the treatment that was being offered and suggesting that it was just unbelievably selfish to refuse. Now, Pink Floyd is a very influential, or has been a very influential band over the past 30 years, and Mark Devlin was quite right to remind us. I already knew, I'd already heard his statement. I'm aware of the malfeasance within the music industry. It hasn't escaped my attention at all. So, and I was also reminded of the Pink Floyd lyric, we don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. That was so popular, wasn't it? Another brick in the wall. But really, it's a piece of very clever deception, if you think about it. To put an untrue statement right next to a true statement is very clever, because people who are unaware of the trickery of philosophy and the trickery of words will confuse the two. Because the truth of the matter, of course, is that we do need an education. Because without an education, we don't have the rational faculty to understand the nature of the world and to apply rigorous principles in our own lives, and also, if we be ever called to do so, just and rigorous principles in respect of justice and law and order, to protect ourselves from those who would harm us. because we all have enemies. We do have enemies in the world, make no doubt about it. Wherever you are standing, you have enemies. And the Lord tells us to love them. And I think that's a very important precept. I don't know whether to call it a commandment, but certainly we should know them and pay attention to what people may be up to behind closed doors. Sometimes it's none of our business, but if it seems that there's something like a cull going on, or some unlawful and ungodly act in the land, then it needs to be exposed and brought to light. Interestingly, Sir Graham Brady is married, I read, to a woman called Victoria Lowther. Now, I don't know who she is, and she leads a very private life, and I'm sure she's quite entitled to do so. I think she works for her husband, and also I think for a university. I'm sure she's very nice, and I wish her well, you know. And it came to my mind that I knew a gentleman from the north of England called William Lowther when I was younger, and he was the Sean of a very highly placed man up in the area of Cumbria, and a man with great wealth and great lands and an historic family. And I knew him and his sister, who was at the time, I believe, addicted to heroin, and was living quite a sort of shocking life, it seemed to me. I don't really know. She often looked quite unkempt. She was a pretty girl, quite pale and almost ghostly, I remember her, but that could have been to do with the drug usage, if that was true. I never saw her use any drugs, well, except for smoking cannabis, but we all used to smoke that in the olden days. And so it was. I've never seen any harm in it personally. I don't really see any harm in heroin if you want to use it. I mean, honestly, people should do what they want to, although I think it would be far better to use opium rather than a refined substance. Opium, I think, is perfectly fine, and as is cocaine, if you go back to the source and find the original plant. I mean, obviously, these are things that have to be used with circumspection. You know, education really is required in all fields. It's very, very careful and clever and really wicked to put those two ideas together, although they work lyrically and everything. And I understand that education is really being used, you could say, as a synonym for indoctrination. But education, if you look at it up etymologically, although they will say that one of the meanings of the Latin possible derivation is to mold, the primary derivation is educatio, which is to lead out or to draw out. You see, you're training the mind. That's what you're trying to do. You're not filling it with, or you shouldn't be filling it with, preconceptions. You're training the mind to think. And to do that, you have to enter into the realm of philosophy a little bit. And, you know, we aren't taught that at school for a good reason. We have to be able to use our powers of reason because they're God-given. And if we are to make reasoned judgments, then we have to be sure of our integrity in our thinking process at the very least, and mindful of our low condition. I think that would be those would be very good starting points. God bless now.